I was reading the other day a history of pandemics in this world. And one of the saddest things that I never knew before was that often with disease comes discrimination. People on the margins, people who are minorities, are often the most mistreated during times of health crises. And sadly, this is happening during the current COVID-19 crisis. Asian Americans are being terribly treated by other people as if they have something to do with this virus. People of color are suffering in greater percentages during this crisis than others. God calls us to do something about that in our world today. And that something is summarized in the word justice. Justice. There's this important moment in the story of Esther when terrible tragedies are happening to the Jewish people. And Esther's father, Mordecai, adopted father, Mordecai, comes in and he tells Esther, look, you've got to do something about this. You've got to engage in this world and participate with what God is doing to bring justice against this injustice. And one of the first things that she does, it's not the only thing that she does, but one of the first things that she does is what Richard Rohr calls radical prayer. Radical prayer. Justice takes many forms, and as we encounter instances of injustice, I believe that God calls us to fight it publicly and actively and unapologetically. And I believe that one of the things God calls us to do is to practice radical prayer, just as Esther did. One of the first things that Esther did, not the only thing that she did, was to call for 3 days of fasting and prayer. And that radical prayer against injustice and suffering in her world is what then opened the door for her to take bold and courageous action herself. I want to encourage you to engage in the practice of radical prayer. And one of the simplest ways of doing this is through a practice called praying the news. There's a group of nuns in Indianapolis who practice this regularly. They get out their newspapers and read them digitally or in paper forms, or they watch a nightly news telecast online or network television. And then when it's done, they gather together and they pray over every single thing that they've seen or heard in the news. It's called praying the news. I want to encourage you to begin praying the news. Right now, the news is filled with so much suffering, so much tragedy, and so much injustice. And rather than doing nothing about that, begin by praying the news. It's a form of radical prayer that will open the door then for you to take additional action to relieve suffering and fight injustice in the world. May God bless you as you pray the news this week.